o'clock outside, and like this doesn't make any sense because I parked somewhere where you couldn't see. No one was on that road. Wait, he's touching my truck. How am I supposed to get him away? He's literally knocking. He's literally knocking on my truck. The canopy, the back door's locked. I can never be scared from wherever. I don't think he knows that there's anyone in here.
Welcome, dear viewer. I hope you are having a wonderful night. Tonight, I'll be telling some terrifyingly scary stories. I hope you are warm and ready. Let's begin. To start out, you need a little background to show how I got into this situation. When I got out of high school around 2003, finding a job was difficult, so I took whatever horrible jobs I could to get by. When I found a job cleaning fire and water damage full-time, I was excited to have a steady income and start saving, but this quickly turned into a nightmare that I had to endure for almost 2 years. The company I worked for put me on my first job, which was a water damage claim where a basement was flooded with sewage. After a few days of work, we finished, and it was on to the next job. My boss then called me into his office the next morning and told me about a special crew that he was setting up and asked if I would be the crew leader, supervising 3 other guys that were just hired. I found this strange, as I had only been working there for a total of around 3 days. But I figured my work ethic was already paying off, and I would get a raise. I only made $10 an hour to start. Not only did I not get the raise, but I also got no training in the new position other than a work van with cleaning material and the phone numbers for the 3 new guys that were also hired to do fire and water damage cleanup. The boss told me what tools were best to use and what cleaning products to use to sanitize, along with where everything was located in the van, with hazmat suits and respirators. But he was vague about what kind of things I would clean up. He just said the situations were always different, and I would get detailed instructions for each job. He called my position C Crew Leader. The boss told me that I would never have to see the deceased, as the coroner would have the remains gone by the time my crew got there, and to use my logic to determine what needed to be removed from the homes and what could be cleaned. The first job I had in my new position, which the boss told me about when I got to the office, was cleaning up the remains of an elderly man or woman who died in their house and had been lying in a chair. When we arrived, the coroner had me come inside to show me a few things that were considered hazardous material and needed to be removed due to the risk of disease. I guess my boss knew a few people from the county coroner's office, and much of the work came from their recommendations. Not only was the deceased still in the house, but he was fully visible to me and the other guy, and you could smell the rot through the masks as the house had no A. And this was mid-June. The coroner was backed up and waiting on additional people to show up to load the body as it was falling apart. And I called the body it because I honestly couldn't tell if it was male or female and was trying not to look too long, as it was disturbing. The other 3 guys I worked with handled it well, but 2 got sick from the smell and had to go outside to puke. We all waited outside after the coroner showed us the chair, the fluids that leaked into the carpet, and basement, where the fluids went through the subfloor and puddled on some boxes in the basement. The coroner's support arrived and took the deceased out, and me and the crew started working. After about 5 minutes, weird things started to happen, the first of which was when I began to disassemble the chair. I had removed the back of the chair and was putting it into the special hazmat bags that I was given, and the base started to rock when I was about 10 feet away, putting the bag with the back of the chair by the front door. Nobody else was in the same room as the other guys, who were in the basement dealing with moving boxes. I brushed it off and took apart the base of the chair as much as I could, and when I got it into the bag, I got a chill at my back and then began feeling sick. I just figured it was the shock of what I was cleaning, hitting me and pushing on, even though the chill was strange as I was very hot in full hazmat in June. Next was removing the carpet and assessing the floor to see if it would be able to be cleaned or if I had to remove a section of the floor. So I called the boss to ask him, and he told me just to pour the special cleaner on the area to soak into the floorboards and it would be fine. So I got it out of the truck where he said it was and brought it inside. When I got inside, all 3 of the guys in the basement were scrambling to get out of the basement, tripping over each other, and all 3 ran outside. When I asked them what was up, all 3 said there was someone in the cluttered basement, and they assumed it was a homeless person or junkie. Detroit has many issues with these kinds of things. I listened to one of the open windows to the basement. It was kind of the first thing we did when we started working. Open any window possible, prop the doors open, so maybe someone got inside then or possibly before we got there and were hiding. After listening for a few minutes and hearing nothing, me and another of the workers went inside, armed with a mag light and a piece of metal fence post, and searched the basement. Nothing was down there but the footprints of the shoe covers we used. But when we started up the stairs, we heard a horrible hacking cough from somewhere in the basement. When we looked for it, there was nothing, but the corner of the basement had a bunch of dust stirred up like someone was moving things very recently, which weirded us both out. We called the guys back in, and they got back to the boxes, but all of them kept feeling like they were being touched while throwing away material from the boxes that got fluids on them. I went back to my upstairs job, but found that the cleaner I put next to the floorboards was gone, and I started getting frustrated as it was the only jug I had of this cleaner, and I clearly remember it being set next to the area before the guys ran up the stairs, and my attention was redirected. I began to take out trash, figuring I would find it eventually or the basement guys would take it for the floor, and I found it on its side, behind the bag that had the back of the chair. This is impossible. There were like 6 other bags in front of this one near the front door, and this was a gallon bottle of cleaner. Again, I got a chill, but this one was brought on by what sounded like a whisper that I could not make out the words to. Cleaned the floorboards and moved out trash. The job is complete. That night, each member of my crew had a dream about an older man telling us that we were not welcome in his home, touching his belongings, and that we needed to leave. In my dream, I was alone in his house. The old man cried and told me I was destroying his things, and he couldn't replace anything. He was trying to push me out of his house, but it was like I was ignoring him, even when he would push me and scream at me. There was no reaction from me. He then threw my cleaner into the garbage pile I had made by the front door, exactly where I found it. 2 of the 3 guys in the crew told me their dreams about the old man pushing them as they went through boxes of ruined pictures and other old stuff that needed to be thrown out due to the risk of disease from his fluids. They also said it was like they had no control and were on autopilot. They said they were so sad but couldn't do anything. The thing that got me about the dreams of the other 2 guys was that they both said the man was getting so upset that he began violently coughing, and that the man kept grabbing their arms when they would touch boxes or throw things into the trash. Neither of the guys were in the house when me or the other guy heard the coughing from the basement. The guy that went into the basement with me said he had a dream, but all he remembered was waking up sad, like he did something wrong, and having a horrible coughing fit, which might just be a coincidence, but I connected it in my mind as relating to the other dreams. We all talked about it and came to the conclusion that we were all just having a reaction to a situation, and it was nothing more than our brains coping with what we had to do. I'm very into psychology, so I rationalized it the best I could, and we hoped for better assignments the next day. The next few jobs were not so bad. Cleaning up blood at a home invasion, no casualties, but a huge mess. Then there were a few other bloody crime scenes with casualties, but nothing notable happened. About 2 weeks into the job, we began to learn the tricks of the trade and were split into 2 different groups that I was responsible for managing as crew leader. So I would have to go to different sites if the other 2 guys had an issue or didn't know what to do. I thought I was getting used to the job as well as the other guys, as we had no other experiences like the first job, but I was wrong. The next job where there was activity was the self-delete of a man who was middle-aged. The coroner had already removed the body, but it was a mess. The guy had shot himself with what I think was a large caliber handgun or shotgun, as the spray was everywhere in the basement, like a second living room. There were skull fragments lodged in the drywall, brain matter all over. And again, he was not found for a bit, so the smell was horrible. The first step in cleaning this was using our backpack vacuum cleaner to soak up all the biomaterial. The coroner told us when we went in that he and his partner were extremely uneasy in the house, and it felt strange. And we immediately started getting a claustrophobic, suffocating feeling when we went into the basement as well. To make matters worse, the family of the man had come over and were crying upstairs, but the vacuum noise helped to cancel out that. While I was cleaning, the power to the lights went out, and it was completely pitch black. This was strange, because my vacuum was still powered. My crewmate started screaming at this point, so I turned off my vacuum and climbed off my ladder. I thought maybe he touched a wire to the lights, but when my vacuum unit was turned off, he was still screaming, and I could hear things being knocked over. I started fumbling around for my flashlight on my tool belt and yelled for my friend, asking what was going on, but all I got back was panicked, screaming. Then I saw in the pitch black something darker that was moving in my direction, and I will admit, I freaked out. I slipped, trying to back up, still looking in my belt for the flashlight, and found it when my back hit the basement wall. I turned on the light, aiming at the blackest shape I have ever seen, and when the light turned on, I saw the shape of a man wearing a flannel shirt, a beard, and an expression like he was about to attack me. Then it was just gone. My crewmate was behind where the entity was, sitting on the floor, rocking with his hands on his head. When I approached, he picked up his flashlight off the ground and turned it on, then ran up the stairs and outside and threw up. I followed behind him, asking if he was okay and why he was screaming. I thought I just imagined the entity and the man because his screaming scared me, but he told me that he was scrubbing the wall and felt something pulling on something in his tool belt, and he thought it was me. But when he turned around, the lights went out, and he was engulfed by what he said was like dark smoke, and he immediately could not breathe and was struggling to move. He managed to pull his flashlight out, but it was knocked out of his hand like his wrist was grabbed with force, and he managed to scream. When he screamed, trinkets started falling off an entertainment center that was about 3 feet to his side, and the black smoke moved back, but he was close to passing out from exertion. He also said he lost hearing and didn't know that any noise came out when he started screaming, and that the stuff falling off the shelves was landing on him. And that's why he was covering his head. He said it felt like a weight was lifted off him when the dark smoke backed up, but he felt sick right away, and the light from my flashlight made the sick feeling increase. We took an early lunch where he just sat there, pale as ever, and didn't say much other than that he breathed in that smoke, and didn't feel right. I got him some Gatorade, and his color started to come back. I never told him I saw a man when I turned on my light, because we still needed to finish, and I didn't want to put that in his head since he never mentioned seeing it. When we went back, the lights in the basement were on again. Half the things that fell from the shelves were back on the entertainment center, and the TV was on baseball. There was also a different smell in the room, similar to burnt hair. My worker stayed a half hour, got sick again, and went home for the day, leaving me alone to finish, which I didn't want to do but had to as the other guys had their own jobs. After cleaning up everything with my vacuum, I began scrubbing the old blood, which is hard after it congeals and mixes with brain matter. It is like glue, even with cleaner. While I was finishing up, I kept seeing the shape of a person always in the side of my vision. Each time, I would smell that strange burnt hair scent. And a few times, I also felt like a force was pulling at items on my belt. Not sure what item, as there were several things in my belt. When I finished the job, I went to use the bathroom upstairs, and in the hallway along the way, I heard muffled crying or moaning. I froze up and stayed still, thinking maybe a family member had come back. When I peered around, there was nothing, but I saw a picture on the wall of a man with a beard wearing a flannel and several other pictures in the hallway of other scenarios of the same man, different flannels with deer, fish, or family. I had not seen a picture of that man, as I had not been anywhere else in the house with a bathroom, nor did I use the bathroom downstairs because pulling off the hazardous stuff is a pain. As I was securing the house, closing all windows, locking doors, and shutting down every light but the front porch light, I saw the front curtain move, and again saw the darker than black form in the front window. The last experience I will share in this thread happened in mid-July in a very bad area of Detroit. There had been an incident where a guy supposedly tried to abduct a child, but was stopped by people in the neighborhood who beat the man very badly, and he escaped to his house, where the neighborhood people quickly called police and civilians surrounded the man's house to prevent escape. The police response time in this area is horrible, and the people were throwing rocks through the man's window and damaging his car. The man was hurt badly by the mob, was hurt by a rock or glass, and died in the home. This is an assumption by .P. From what the police officer told me, it was a misunderstanding, and the man picked up a girl who was injured riding her bike, and some kids that knew her told their parents that the man was kidnapping her, and people overreacted, and the man was brutally beaten. The cleanup was pretty simple to do. We secured windows and cleaned up blood and bodily fluid. But as soon as I entered the house, I just felt wave after wave of fear and sadness, like I had never felt this before, and it hit in waves that made my legs weak. My working buddy who was there showed up late and didn't get the story from the cop like I did, but I experienced the same feelings. The whole time we were there, we saw a form darting around corners, like it was watching us, then hiding. It was similar to a small bit of fog or mist. We also heard very slight cries for help coming from several areas in the house, and also what sounded like, "Please stop," and "No." A few times the crowd came back and yelled at the house, and when this was going on, the activity in the house increased, and we could hear running footsteps go up the stairs. A door slam, and it sounded like the front door would open and close, but we never saw any of the doors move. The path of the footsteps sounded like the front door, through the living room, to the bathroom, and up the stairs to the upstairs bungalow room. The part that really got me was that I could feel the floor impacts that felt like the vibrations of someone running past me when I was cleaning the areas, and each time I would be hit by one of those waves of fear and sadness. When we left the house, there were a few people on porches hanging out like usual during the summer, and the people were still hostile and yelling random things, but directed at us as we loaded the van and took off hazmat suits. We ignored this. But before we had loaded all the material from the house into the van and locked the house, the front door slammed hard enough to sound like a gunshot, which scared me and my crew member, along with the people on the front porch, to the point where they went inside. The front door deadbolt was somehow locked, and we could not get it open. I think it was a different key than the knob. So we ended up leaving several boards in the house that were left over from boarding a few of the windows. The feeling of relief when I left the house was like night and day. Inside, I was anxious, scared, paranoid, and just really down, which could be due to knowing the story. But when I got outside, it was like flipping a light switch. I immediately felt better, and me and the other guy in my crew were joking and laughing about dumb stuff and normal 20-year-old shenanigans. I have many of these stories written down in detail in a journal I started after the first 3 months of working at this job. I talked to the guys on the cruise and got other strange stories from them too. I know that some of this could very well be formed by my subconscious mind to cope with traumatic situations, but some of it has no explanation. And when I hear other members of my crew tell me their stories when they haven't been influenced by mine, that is a horse of a different color. When I have time, I will pull out the journal and share more of my experiences. The job got way worse when I started the journal after 3 months. I had several experiences with what I thought was paranormal. Many situations that stressed my mental state to the point where my mask of sanity started to slip. In the end, I worked at this place for almost 2 years, and of my crew, all died. 2 from self-delete, 1 from a drug overdose that could have been intentional, but we will never know. I just know that when these 3 guys, my age, around 19 and 20, started this job, all were normal, well-adjusted guys with no cares in the world other than girls, parties, and working. I watched each one of them slowly drain their joys and passion for life. And I know this sounds bad, but each one that died was considerate enough to die in a clean way. Most likely so another person wouldn't have to see the horrible thing that we all saw so often. Okay, here it goes. I have a medical background and a certification I rarely use, though I keep going back and paying to renew it. Anyhow, I volunteered almost immediately, thinking I would help those who had lived through Katrina. That was not the case. There were a few of us who were assigned once the water started to recede to find houses that had dead bodies in them. If you've ever had to do a body recovery when it has been lying around in the heat and the water for days, sometimes weeks at a time, you know how it smells. It does sort of smell like any other dead carcass, but worse. I can't explain it. Maybe somehow it's sweeter smelling. Anyway, the key to not vomiting when you smell them is to put Vicks under and around the bottom of your nose. It doesn't keep all the smell out, but enough until you can at least tolerate the smell without vomiting. We had to go to each house, go inside in wading boots and look for bodies. Many of them were washed out to sea, but some were still in the houses they had lived in prior to the hurricane. If we found a body, we spray painted a big X on the outside of the house. This other guy and I had been doing it for a while, and we got assigned to each other almost every day. We got along okay, and he didn't vomit at the ones that had been gotten to. We came up to this one old shack. I say shack because it was pretty run down, and in what had been a very bad neighborhood. Right away, I got chills down my spine. I knew there was something really wrong. Not like finding a body kind of wrong, but chilling kind of wrong. New Orleans has certain areas that just give off these vibes, and my understanding is that there is a lot of voodoo practiced in certain areas. Anyway, against everything my body was screaming at me, we went in the house. The first thing I could smell was a body. The second was something almost earthy and moldy. I looked at my partner. I will call him Jay. He was white as a sheet of paper. I could tell he was getting the same feeling I had been getting. It was obvious from the weird bones hanging from the ceiling. I would bet money they were cats, that something odd had been going down in the house, as well as strange beads and carvings in the bare wood in the walls. We went into what was a kitchen, and there, chained to a beam, was an old lady, or what was left of her. She had chained herself by her wrists to the beam. Her guts were falling out on the floor. The creepiest thing was that her face still looked as though she were alive and staring at us with a wicked smile showing only partial teeth. They were nubs. My skin started crawling as the goosebumps spread over my body, and my neck hair stood up. Suddenly, I heard the most unearthly cackling noise I have ever heard in my life, and my flight or fight kicked in. Jay and I noped out of there. We quickly painted the X and literally ran to the next house. Now, I don't know if that old lady had practiced voodoo or whatever, but that scared the ever-living shit out of me. It still gives me nightmares. The people I feel sorry for are the ones who had to take that crazy lady out of there. Jay and I discussed it that night after we went back to the hotels north of there. He had heard the cackling too, but we both said it had to be the wind or something. I grew up in a densely forested rural area in central Virginia, and like most kids my age, 10 at the time of this story, I spent a lot of time playing in and around the woods. My best friend and I had found a creek one day while exploring different deer trails through the woods. This creek we happened on was a very rare find, and the perfect spot for us to play. It was wide and deep enough to swim around in and had nice, soft, mossy banks on either side to rest on after we had tired ourselves out. The water was cool and clear. There were no copperheads or mosquitoes because the water was constantly running. We were psyched. After a few hours of swimming, we had to walk back home for lunch, but we made plans to pack lunch the next day so we could have a picnic on the creek banks and spend the whole day there. The next morning, we set out for the woods at around 1 p.m., planning to have the picnic first and swim after. We entered at the same spot we had the previous day and followed what we thought was the same deer trail. It was not. At the point where we should have found the creek, we walked into a small clearing that was covered in huge, thick ferns. We had definitely never walked past this before, so being both hungry and tired of walking, we decided to eat in the clearing. We laughed and played around there for a while, spitting watermelon seeds at each other from our lunch. It was an absolute blast, and we were both in wonderful, giddy moods. That all changed, however, as soon as we packed up and set back out to find the creek. As we walked in the woods, it started to feel darker and colder. We got skittish, and I noticed my friend kept whipping her head around to look behind us. After about a half hour of walking, we came up with what looked like an entire overgrown bathroom. Sink, toilet, and bathtub, all sitting together and covered in ivy. It's pretty common to find weird shit like this in the middle of the woods, so we just walked on and made jokes to lighten the mood, calling it Bigfoot's bathroom. After another hour of walking and not seeing anything we recognized, we started to panic. Instead of trying to reach the creek, we were now just trying to find our way back home or out of the woods at least. I told her we should follow the sun, and eventually we would come up on a road or someone's property where we could find help. She insisted on another way, and we began yelling at each other out of fear. And let's be honest, little girl bossiness. I told her if she thought she was so right, she should just go her way, and we would see who got out first. So we split up. Now, as an adult, I fully acknowledge that I was a stubborn brat and also an idiot. The worst possible thing we could have done. Not 10 minutes after splitting up, I began to hear someone walking, maybe 100 feet behind me. Thinking it was my friend deciding to go my way after all, I slow down so she can catch up to me. Instead, whatever it was, it matched my pace. I slow down. It slows down. I stop. It stops. This went on for hours. The whole time, I was going back and forth on whether or not it was in my head or if there was really something following me. I picked up a big stick, swung it a few times to make sure it was sturdy if I had to hit someone, and trucked on. As it began to get dark, I came up with something that made my heart sink into my stomach. It was Bigfoot's bathroom. I had just walked in a huge circle for hours despite being 100 unsure jar. I was following the setting sun the entire time. Confused and frustrated, I sat down on a log and just screamed my little heart out while smacking my whoop-ass stick repeatedly into the ground. As I tried to collect myself, I heard footsteps walking up on me from behind. I called out my friend's name as loud as I could. No answer. Then, after a short pause, the steps began to run towards me. I jumped up and booked it as fast as I could in the opposite direction. Now, this is the truly horrifying part, which I typically omit while telling people this story. As I was sprinting through the darkening woods, I began to hear what I thought were church bells. I looked up to see the darkest, deepest cloud I have even seen in my life. In the middle, it was so black that it was like looking into the night sky, and the dark gray around it seemed to be swirling. It gave me a horrible feeling to look at, almost like the nausea you get when looking through binoculars for too long. What sickened me further is that I realized the sound of the bells was coming through the hole in the cloud. They were deafeningly loud. I mean, really booming out of this thing. When I realized this, I stopped dead in my tracks. I felt a sense of absolute and overwhelming dread that has gone unmatched in all my 24 years on this planet. something in my head began screaming that if I did not run away from whatever the hell that cloud was, no one would ever see me again. I would be gone. I did not want to run toward the thing chasing behind me either, though. So I made a sharp right and took off away from both. It was now completely dark, and I was running blind through the woods, smacking through branches, wheezing, and tripping every few feet for what seemed like another hour. I smacked into something low and flew over it, hitting the ground so hard that all the air in my lungs was knocked out of me. As I lay there, trying to recover, I realized I couldn't hear the bells anymore. Then my eyes adjusted more to the dark, and I realized what had just made me go ass over teeth was an old fence. Grabbing hold of it, I prayed it would lead me to a farm, and sure enough, it did. I walked up over a hill about a mile to the back of the farmhouse, explained what had happened, and the farmer graciously gave me a ride back home. I was covered head to toe in scrapes, oozing blood, and more exhausted than I had ever been in my life, but I was finally safe. It was past 9 p.m. when I finally walked through my front door. My friend had gotten back shortly after we split and figured I had as well. So I hadn't told anybody I was lost, and my family just figured I was still out after dark, which wasn't uncommon for me. They were shocked when I walked in, beat up, and started crying. Nobody had been looking for me at all. To this day, I wonder how long they would have waited to come find me if I hadn't been lucky enough to find the fence, and if it would have been too late.